Welcome into Shamrock Sports. Hey, episode 1 of the new semester, which means that, unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about the Cotton Bowl. And we'll get to that and plenty of more men's basketball, women's basketball. That's coming up next on the second semester of Shamrock Sports.
Hello, I'm Father John Jenkins, president of the University of Notre Dame, and thank you for watching Shamrock Sports.
Welcome back to the second floor Duncan Student Center studios with Austin Rooney and Ellen Geyer. John Horlander is running around. We're not sure where he is. We couldn't find him for the show this week, so we let Ellen take his spot.
Yeah, sorry, Horlander.
Horlander will be back in about 3 weeks. Caroline Pineda will be here next week, and then the week after, the debut of a one Paul Farrington. Shamrock Sports viewers may not know Paul Farrington yet, but you will soon enough.
You won't forget his name.
Well, on December 29th, I'd like to say I was just at home, just enjoying a nice day.
The holiday season.
Trying to wind down from Christmas. But unfortunately, I was in Dallas, Texas.
That's right.
And I had to watch another playoff debacle from our beloved Fighting Irish football team. And I guess since it's the first show, and I know it's been weeks since the game, but we still have to process this.
And it's taken a while
We're
to
still in
process.
the grieving process.
Yes.
And this is something that we have to do. We have to talk about it. We have to air our grievances.
Yes.
We have to vent.
The first step is acceptance.
The first step is acceptance,
Yes.
and I think we've all accepted what occurred
Yeah.
against Clemson. But let's go big picture here and just talk about the state of the program as a whole after that game. Great season, 12-1, and I think a season that a lot of us, when it started, would have never expected to happen, but a very disappointing end.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. I think that Notre Dame came into this season, they probably were hoping for 8-4, 9-3, possibly getting to the playoff in a dream scenario, but that probably was not the goal coming into the season necessarily. So the fact they made the playoff, I think that was a big positive, nice step in the right direction for the Notre Dame program. And moving forward, I think that it has to be the goal again next season. Ian Book's back next year, and they're going to have a lot of similar pieces. Of course, Miles Boykin's going to the NFL draft, Dexter Williams also. So there's some additional question marks on the offensive side of the ball, but a lot of the offensive line's returning. You have somebody like Ian Book running the quarterback again, so I think they've got an opportunity to make a big splash again next season.
Was this just a case of Clemson was just that much better?
I think after the game, I didn't think that, and we thought that it was just really, Notre Dame had a terrible game. In every facet of the field, they were just completely outplayed. But then I think after you watch that Clemson-Alabama game, you do realize what a good team Clemson did have. And obviously being able to put up those numbers against that Alabama team that, frankly, I think at least I expected Alabama to win it all.
Yeah, they looked untouchable the whole year.
I think it was just I think they had an exceptional year. I mean, people are saying it's one of the better teams of, like, the current era. So I think that, the line was, 13 in Clemson's favor. So the score kind of reflects what people's expectations were for
You make a good point about that. I think that coming into the game, I expected it to be a close game. I thought that Notre Dame had a real shot at winning. I don't know if you all remember when we made our predictions in the last show before break. I picked Notre Dame to win by 3 points. I think I had it at 27-24, and that did not happen, obviously. But I thought Notre Dame is capable of playing with this Clemson team, and we saw that that's just not the case. Clearly, Clemson was head and shoulders above. They're better than Alabama, too. And going back to your point about being one of the best teams of this era, the last 4 years, Clemson and Alabama have identical records. Both of them have 2 national championships. Both of them have been to the playoff every time. So I think that it really is true. Those 2 teams are at the top, and then it's everybody else right below them.
You know, it would be short-sighted to not recognize the gains that the program has made over the past couple of years. 3 10-win seasons in 4 years. They're 22-4 in the last 2 seasons. It's in a great spot right now.
Yeah.
And yet here we are after a 12-1 season wondering if they will ever reach that pinnacle. do you think it's possible, after having witnessed what we saw against Clemson in the Cotton Bowl and then what Clemson did to Alabama, can Notre Dame ever get there? It felt like this year was their best shot.
Yeah, I honestly don't know if Notre Dame can, because we look at these Alabama and Clemson programs, and just the way that their entire program is structured is just so dominant. It's so football focused. They have these amazing facilities. They get these top recruits. They just have this mindset that just seems to be so dominant, and I don't know if that's a style, like a program style that Notre Dame can have, just in the way the university is structured, being a private school, all these things that come with it. So I don't know. I mean, maybe we can. Hopefully we can, but I don't know, and I really don't know under Brian Kelly whether we can either. So.
And that's a good point, Ellen. I think the Brian Kelly point is one that has to be at least looked at, because we look at the last 3 really big games Notre Dame's had, with the exception maybe of that Georgia game early last season. The games they played, whether it be versus Miami in Miami last season, and then you go back to the game versus Alabama in Miami 6 years ago now, and then the game this year. So those are the 3 really the biggest games they played, and they've gotten blown out in each and every one of them. And the question is, can they really compete with those top-end talents? And I'm just not quite sure right now. I think that Brian Kelly has to prove himself that he can win these big games. And there's no doubt the next time Notre Dame makes the playoff, whether that's next year, whether that's in 5 years, whether that's in 10 years, they will be massive underdogs, and as they should be, because they have not proven as an institution that they can beat these big teams in these big games.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think their 0-6 is their record in the past 6 major bowl games that Notre Dame has played in. And even a program like Texas, we all know Texas has struggled a lot since their last national title, since Mac Brown left. And yet Texas comes along this year, they finish 10-4, and they win the Sugar Bowl. Even just to win a New Year's Six bowl game, wouldn't that be so nice? But every time Notre Dame gets there, they just flounder, and it feels like the program's still miles away.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that this season has been so good, is that legitimate?
I think so, and I think it's hard because you see the games that we had this season, like the Michigan game. That was a great win. We had some good wins on the road too, and you think, okay, Notre Dame really can compete with these top teams, but then we don't have these conference matchups that every other team does. We're not playing in a conference championship. I think all these things compound to kind of sometimes give the illusion that we're a little bit better than we are. And obviously people argue, since we're independent, don't have that conference championship, that maybe we shouldn't be included in the playoff. And I think that this year reflects that maybe that sentiment is true, and maybe we shouldn't be included because we don't have that conference championship, so we don't really see that kind of competition. So I think that this year does hurt our chances in the future. Obviously, we said before, a 12-0 season, Notre Dame can't be left out. But I think in the future, when you look back on this year with an undefeated season, there is that potential that we could be left out, considering how things played out this past year.
I think you make a good point. I think another point you have to make, though, moving forward towards next season, is that how big are the other games in your schedule, especially how big are the games versus whether it be SEC teams or ACC teams, such as Georgia. Next year, I think if Notre Dame finds a way to beat Georgia and they go undefeated again, they're in without a doubt. Because if you're able to beat a Georgia team, that is in essence beating that top 5 team, the team that everybody talks about as the biggest conference in the SEC. So in that scenario, they do get in. But you make a good point. If they're 12-0 and they don't play any top-level ACC teams, whether it be a Florida State or a Clemson or a top-level SEC team, I would not be stunned if they get left out. And there are a lot of people right now. I talked to a lot of people down at Alabama. I was at the Orange Bowl, and a lot of people were telling me.
How do the Alabama fans feel about this?
They were telling me consistently Notre Dame needs to join a conference, or they may very well get left out in the near future. And it's not a popular sentiment among Notre Dame fans, but I wouldn't be stunned if Notre Dame ends up joining a conference in the next couple of years, joining the ACC and playing in that ACC championship game. There may be some caveats there, because I think that if Notre Dame is able to keep their NBC current TV contract, and if they're able to only, let's say, play 7 conference games as opposed to 8, maybe that's a scenario when Notre Dame accepts that, because they want to still play their rival teams. But on the other hand, you have to think they need to join a conference at some point if they're going to make this playoff consistently.
What did those Alabama fans feed you?
Yeah, there must have been something in the water.
Did you just say you would not be surprised if in the next few seasons Notre Dame joins a conference?
I would not be stunned.
That is absolutely crazy.
It is specifically if Notre Dame has trouble making the playoff. If they go 12-0 and find themselves on the outside looking in, or in a second scenario, let's say there's an 8-team playoff and each of the 5 conferences is represented, at that point, if you get an automatic bid for winning your conference,
our chances are higher.
No, well, they may
With
be higher.
An 8-team playoff,
No,
yeah.
but again,
Brian
if
Kelly
there is an
advocated
automatic,
for an 18
but
playoff.
again, if
at-large
there is an
spots.
automatic bid from the ACC,
Right,
and then
but
you
then
have
there's
2
three. Then there's 3 at-large spots,
and then
right?
you'd
Get the
likely have a
top
group of
5
5. You'd have a group of
conferences.
5 teams, so then you'd have 2 at-large spots remaining. So again, if you have an opportunity to get an automatic bid and,
And
you're turning that down,
undefeated
it's
Notre
tough.
Dame is always going to get one.
Well,
of
they'll
those
get in, but
spots.
11-1 Notre Dame, maybe they don't. Maybe there's a couple teams in the conference championships who don't win their conference championship, and then they find themselves on the outside looking in an 8-team playoff. I just think that there's a lot to lose from not being in a conference, and the tradition aspect. There are a lot of things that have happened recently. Whether it's a lot of people were upset about the field moving from grass to turf, and a number of other things regarding the tradition. I wouldn't be stunned to see this team go and move into the ACC.
So because we went from natural grass to turf, that means
need to
the
join a
logical
conference.
progression is that we join a conference. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
but I do think that being independent does have its benefits. I mean, we get to see such a wide variety of competition. Last season,
true.
we got to see Georgia. We'll see them again next season. We got to see Michigan this year. I think that's nice. We see Virginia Tech.
You get to
those
keep
teams.
all of the great rivalries too.
Yeah.
Well, that was my point, especially about the 7-game conference schedule. If you're able to keep it at just 7 games in the ACC, then you can play your Stanfords, your Michigans, your Michigan States, your Navies,
But
even,
it's
add
right,
in.
Currently, it's a 5-game setup.
That's
with
right.
the ACC.
That's right.
And if you went full time, it'd be
An
9.
8 game. It's 8. It's 8.
8. Okay.
It's 8. So my thought is, if Notre Dame joins the ACC, they may be able to convince the ACC simply from their being there to cut it to a 7-game schedule and do some maneuvering there, because Notre Dame's power in a conference like the ACC is so strong.
But do you want to go into the ACC with Clemson?
Well, that's what it takes to make
mean-
the playoff. That's what it takes at this point. You got to play those top-level opponents. Clemson's one of those top-level opponents. They have to show they're good enough to play at the ACC level with those top-level opponents so they can prove to be in the playoffs.
Right, but if you're going to see Clemson, wouldn't you rather see them in the college football playoff than in the ACC championship or the regular season?
Well, if Notre Dame's undefeated and they're playing them in the ACC championship game, a win or a loss would probably be good enough to get them in with an 8-team playoff. I don't think it's a big issue.
But with an 8-team playoff,
With an
not
8-team
with a
playoff, even
4-team
with a
playoff.
4-team playoff, a 12-1 record, I think that's pretty darn good. And in a lot of scenarios, that's good enough to still make the playoffs. So it's tough. It's never fun to play those tough teams, but you have to play those tough teams if you're going to be the #1 team in the country, and that's what Notre Dame's looking to do right now.
Yeah,
Their
I
goal
don't
is to win it all.
necessarily disagree with you, but I don't think it requires joining a conference. And this season, I think, proved that. Now, listen, anyone with 1 loss is liable to not make the playoff.
That's fair, yeah.
Conference or not. Notre Dame being in a conference this year probably, not or being independent this year, actually probably helped them make
They
the
probably
playoff.
didn't have to play Clemson. I think that's right.
Right, but
Right.
also, and there are a number of other benefits too. For example, the week of the conference championship games, Coach Kelly and his staff could fly around the country and recruit kids for the early signing period, while everyone else is having to prepare for a conference championship game. There's one little advantage to
Detail.
being independent.
It's a small advantage, but then again, you have to think of the big picture. Notre Dame wants to be at the top of college football, and if they're not able to do so with the current setup, people are going to start comparing them to UCF, because despite the fact Notre Dame's schedule is significantly harder than UCF's, they're not playing in a conference, which is the same criticism that UCF is getting, and I would not be surprised.
UCF's in a conference.
Well, not in a Power 5 conference. They're in a Group of 5 conference, which is a big difference.
Yeah, but the criticism they also get is that they don't schedule anyone in their non-conference.
Well, the
schedule.
other problem is a lot of teams don't want to play UCF. If I'm a Power 5 conference team, I don't want to play UCF because
these games
they're
are
a small
scheduled like 5
conference
years
team.
in advance.
That's
so
true.
yeah,
that's
5
true.
years ago, if UCF came calling, I wouldn't have batted an eye. But if UCF comes calling now, if I'm a Power 5
You don't want to schedule.
team and I'm looking for a good out-of-conference matchup, I think that's a great matchup.
You get that.
But
That's
you
a
can
good win to get on your record.
I would rather have an out-of-conference game against another Power 5 school. So if I lose, it doesn't look so bad. A lot of people still look at any Group of 5 team.
But you
look
need
down
at
on those
least
teams.
2 or 3 non-Power 5 out-of-conference
And a lot of
opponents.
teams-
And UCF would be a great team to fit
And a
that
lot of
spot.
teams would prefer to just get these cupcake matchups against these out-of-conference teams. A team like Alabama, if you're Alabama and you're playing tough game week after week in the SEC,
Yeah.
I don't want to play a tough team out of conference. I want to play a team that I can win easily,
Like the
especially
Citadel.
like the Citadel, which was close after the first half, but they ended up pulling away pretty
They
easily.
were tied.
Yeah.
They were tied at halftime. You brought up Brian Kelly. Question is, has he hit his ceiling at Notre Dame?
Yes.
Do you think he can do any better?
I mean, I don't think so, because we saw this season, obviously they overperformed. We didn't think they were going to be this good. And then we had that 2012 season. So I think both times he had the opportunity on the big stage. Obviously it didn't come together, and it all fell apart at the last minute. So I think, I mean, it can't get higher, because like we said, can Notre Dame even elevate to that level that Alabama and Clemson are at? And if they can, I don't know if Brian Kelly's the person that's going to be able to do it, because if he hasn't been able to do it in the last however many years, I don't think he's going to be able to do it in the next 2 or 3.
He'll be in his 10th season next year. That's a long time to coach at this place. And to have not won anything, I mean, what's his biggest accomplishment? A Citrus Bowl win?
Citrus Bowl win. That's what I thought. It's probably a Citrus Bowl win.
Now, and like I said a couple of minutes ago, it would be short-sighted to not recognize the gains that have been made.
Yes.
Need I remind Notre Dame fans, before Brian Kelly came, how terrible of a state the program was in? And even after the 2016 season and the complete 180 that's occurred. So there have been substantive steps that have been taken to improve the program, but it just feels like it's hit a certain limit.
Yeah, I mean, credit where credit is due. Brian Kelly is a brilliant coach. He knows what he's doing. Obviously, he has what it takes to win to some extent.
Right.
But I think if Notre Dame wants to elevate itself into just that higher tier program, I think they're going to just have to make some changes.
And that brings up a whole I mean, we could spend a whole episode on that. Really quickly, as we just put a button on this conversation, what's next? I mean, what do the Irish need to win a national championship? Is it 1 or 2 players? What do they have to do?
I don't want to say it's a change in culture, because we think we saw that change in culture after the 2016 season. But there has to be something that changes, because we've seen it time and time again. They get into these big games and they can't follow through. They can't actually win. And something has to change if they're going to find a way to win those big-time games.
But what? What is it?
It's tough to say. I don't want to say a change in coaching staff right now, because I think that Brian Kelly's done enough to say, look, he deserves his job still for the foreseeable future. But I don't think that there is one easy answer to say what needs to change for them to win. So I don't really have an answer as to what specifically. I don't think it's the culture. I don't think it's 1 or 2 players. I think it's probably something more than that. But then again, I don't think it's time to change the coaches either.
Okay.
I think it could be a change in culture even further, because you look at these teams that are just consistently good. Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, teams like that. They just have this swagger about them, and nobody wants to play them. It doesn't matter if they're having a good year or a bad year. Nobody wants to play them. And I think Notre Dame's not quite at that level yet. They just don't have the air and the aura. They don't bring the competitive intensity sometimes that all these other teams bring, because it can't be the players, because we had so many players on both sides of the ball this season that were excellent. Brian Kelly obviously knows what he's doing. So I think the only thing that's left to change really is the culture of the program as a whole, and kind of if the Irish can somehow find a way to boost themselves, just have that swagger.
Yeah. All right. That's enough for football. We're going to take that conversation, throw it out there in the ether, and we'll come back
and
to
table
it in
until
September
next year.
or August, when you guys are around. I won't be around, but you guys will have to take the mantle there. Let's move now to men's basketball, which isn't much of a happier topic.
Oh gosh.
We'll talk women's basketball too, which is a much happier topic.
Yes.
But to kick it off, the men's basketball team for the Irish this weekend have a huge weekend. You have 2 top 5 teams coming into town, UVA on Saturday and Duke on Monday. So Caroline Pineda kicks us off to give us an inside look at both of those teams.
The men's basketball team is entering its toughest weekend of the season, facing 2 of the top 3 teams in the nation within 3 days. First up is Virginia on Saturday, followed by Duke on Monday, both here in Purcell Pavilion. Well, Virginia might be easy to overlook with Duke looming large, but you can't forget that the Cavaliers might in fact be the better team of the 2, despite losing 72-70 to Duke last week. Jay Billis this week in his Power Index listed the Cavaliers above the Duke Blue Devils, saying that they do bring a lot to the table going into the rest of the season. Despite that loss, Virginia's big 3 still showed up. Kyle Guy, DeAndre Hunter, and Ty Jerome all scoring in double figures and grabbing at least 4 boards. Virginia's pack line defense kept them in that game, holding Duke, a team that is number 3 in scoring offense, almost 20 points below their season average. Virginia and head coach Tony Bennett are known for that pack line defense, and it's part of the reason 6'7" DeAndre Hunter is a projected top 15 draft pick. The Cavaliers lead the nation in scoring defense, allowing an average of just 52.4 points per game, but they barely break the top 200 in scoring offense. Virginia also boasts the fewest turnovers by a wide margin, averaging 8.7 per game. and protecting the ball is one of the heralds of this veteran squad. Bennett starts 1 senior, 3 juniors, and a sophomore, and their experience shows in big situations. But the other upcoming opponent for the Irish could not be more different. Duke's best 4 players are all freshmen, and they have 3 freshmen who could go in the top 5 in the draft this year. First and foremost, Zion Williamson, 6'7", 284, and Coach K called him the best athlete he's ever had come through his program. Zion averages close to a double-double with 21.7 points and 9.3 rebounds, not to mention 1.8 blocks a game. Zion is undoubtedly the number 1 overall pick, but Duke also boasts R.J. Barrett and Cam Reddish, the other 2 freshmen behind the number 3 scoring offense in the nation. Both of these teams have been called unbeatable at different points in the season, but both have been beaten. And this weekend, the Irish will have their chance to face off against 2 of the top 3 teams in the country.
All right, Caroline, it's been a whirlwind for the men's basketball team. 1-5 in ACC play. Tough start.
That's 17%, by the way. 17% win percentage.
Just in case you.
For the record.
Yeah, thank you. You had an early season transfer with Elijah Burns, a captain, something that sort of came out of left field. They've got arguably 2 of the best teams in America coming into town this weekend. What's the good news?
Well, the good news is that Notre Dame has had a massive growth within John Mooney. I think John Mooney has become one of the top power forwards or big men in the ACC. I think we're going to see that moving forward towards next year. He's averaging 14.4 points per game. He's got 10.8 rebounds per game. I mean, those numbers are outstanding. Those are Bonzie Colson-esque numbers. And I think he's a better outside shooter than Bonzie Colson is. He shoots from 3 better. I think that John Mooney is really a complete player. And if you look back 2 years ago, he was coming off the bench playing 3-4 minutes a game. Yeah. Last season, he got more minutes, and he showed that he's a really good college basketball player. And this year, he's jumped into that elite realm of top ACC talent. So I think that's the first thing you have to look at. In terms of other news, I think some of the freshmen are starting to get there. Dane Goodwin had a really good game a couple of games ago. Leszewski's coming in. He's sometimes struggling shooting the ball, but we saw him
had a career
recently
high against Georgia Tech
exactly
this
right.
week,
Georgia Tech, he had a great game. So it's a little bit versus UNC. He struggled. That was one of the games where he wasn't quite able to get everything together. But again, this is a team that is it's a work in progress. They're getting there. They're still a young team, and I think next season, this is going to be a very good Notre Dame team, a team that probably goes something like 12-6 in the ACC with a senior in John Mooney, a senior in TJ Gibbs, Rex Pfluger returning for another year, and those freshmen a year older. This is a team that has a lot of potential next season. This season, though, I have a hard time believing that they're going to get anywhere near the tournament.
Oh, yeah. No, they're not going to get near it unless it's played in, I don't know, Dayton.
Chicago.
Well, there's yeah. I guess then they'll be near it. No, you're right about Mooney, though. He's quietly put together a really good season, and he's improved a lot. Jawan Durham, a transfer from UConn, leads the ACC in blocks. I mean, there are some bright spots here and there. And let's face it, they've had a couple of tough breaks, too, with the injuries. I mean, it was 2 weeks ago against Boston College when they literally played with 6 people on the bench. Yeah. And they won the game. So thank you, Boston College, for continually boosting our morale. Year in and year out. We appreciate it. Football, basketball, it doesn't really matter. You guys are always there for us. But this weekend is, well, let's just say the mountain is very high.
Yeah.
Can they eclipse
I don't
the
know.
summit?
I mean, they're on a 3-game loss streak, and I think it's gonna be 5 this time Tuesday. Yeah. I just don't. The pieces aren't coming together. Like you said, there's too many growing pains. It's a young team. Yeah. They can't pull it together, and on top of all that, their shooting has been abysmal. They can't get anything. They're just in that Georgia Tech game the other day. It's just those are the kind of games you need to win, especially when you have Duke and Virginia on the horizon. It would have been a nice win. They competed with that team. They had they should have won that game. There was no reason they shouldn't have won that game. Sure. And they'll see Georgia Tech again later in the season, and I would be shocked if they didn't win. So I don't understand. I just think when you have these smaller games that come up, you need to have those victories if you want to just even have a winning record.
Good news for this weekend, though. Mike Bray has typically been very good against top 5 teams. He has 11 wins in his Notre Dame career against top 5 teams. And you know what? Somebody's got to beat him, right? So why not us? We'll see. Freshman starting trio, by the way, is the first in Mike Bray's 19 years as head coach. So you're right. Lot to look forward to. A lot of potential energies there, but it's not happening this season. Let's talk about the women's team. Quite a different story. Number 1 in the country.
Yes.
They're on a 12-game win streak. Just beat Tennessee on Thursday night after trailing at halftime. It's a close win. Well, close. They won by 15. But Tennessee stuck with them, and Tennessee's not that good this year. But after that UConn loss, it's looked really good. They had a great win against Louisville at home when they were number 2, and I mean, they sit poised right now to really win the rest of their games.
And that Louisville win was great, especially given the history between those two programs. Louisville obviously beat Notre Dame last year, and so I think that this team has proven themselves to be strong in adversity. That Tennessee game last night, like you said, Notre Dame was trailing at halftime. The only time they had the lead in the first half, I believe, was when it was 2-0. So they were really resilient, especially against that Tennessee team, which is young. They were feisty. They stuck with the Irish. And Notre Dame was having some struggles on the transition. Couldn't really make their shots either. But I think their ability to kind of pull it together in the locker room at halftime and come back into the second half and really firing on all cylinders, I think that's huge, and that just shows why they are the team that they are and why they have that kind of success is because they're able to turn it around.
Enrique had 16 points in the third quarter alone last night. It's part of the big run that helped Notre Dame pull away.
And this is the polar opposite of the men's basketball team, this women's team is, because they have so much senior depth. The Notre Dame men's team has next to none. This Notre Dame team on the women's side has, they have their 5 big players who are their starters: Agumbawale, Mabry, Young, Turner, and Shepard. And of those 5, 4 are seniors. They'll be graduating this year. So it's crucial. This is Notre Dame's time to go back-to-back, because next year, I'm not seeing it, not with the current roster, because they'll get a couple freshmen coming in that are going to be big pieces, but they don't have those top 5 players that they do right now who are stars. They're going to have Young, who's the only player who's coming back. So that's going to be tough for Notre Dame. With that said, I think that Notre Dame's women's team is really good. I was very concerned after that UConn loss. I thought maybe they're not in that top tier. Maybe UConn just really is that much better. But after wins over Louisville and Notre Dame continuing to win by large margins, with the exception of last night versus Tennessee, I am confident this team will be able to make it back to the finals. And I think their only real test is UConn.
Yeah, no, the rest of their season is going to be fun to watch. They're on the road against North Carolina and Clemson, and then back home on February 3rd against Georgia Tech. All right, Austin, we promised you that we'd give you like 10 seconds for hockey, so go ahead and tell everyone what's going on this weekend.
So Notre Dame right now is going to be taking on Michigan State tonight. It's at Compton Family Ice Arena. 2 games versus the Spartans. The Spartans sitting at 9, 12, and 3. They've won 3 in a row. Notre Dame, on the other hand, has not had a regulation win in 4 of their last 5 games. They did take 5 out of 6 points from Wisconsin last weekend, but still, this is a Notre Dame team that's looking to build, looking to get a little bit better towards the home stretch of this season. They do have a couple of injuries. Joe Wegworth, who was one of their top scorers, he's out for the season. Cal Burke, another one of their top scorers, was out last weekend versus Wisconsin. And Cam Morrison, a former second-round pick of the Colorado Avalanche, he was also out last weekend. They're both questionable for this weekend's matchup. So there's some question marks moving forward for Notre Dame. We'll have to see if they can solve those and not only get back to the tournament, but possibly get back to another Frozen Four. I think they have a shot.
All right. Yeah. There you have it. There's your hockey segment.
And for our laymen, the Irish are 12th, ranked 12th.
They are ranked 11th or 12th.
11th or 12th,
yeah,
and they did win the Big Ten last year.
They did win the Big Ten. They made it all the way to the finals.
More layperson knowledge than the fancy
they were
stats
national
that Rudy
runners-up.
has.
I mean,
they are.
Hey, when they make it that far, you have my attention. All right?
Yeah.
Until then, they're all yours, baby.
We'll be on the call tonight.
Yeah.
Yes, you guys have fun with that.
Maybe we can run a fencing segment in the future. If we're going to give hockey time,
I'd be happy to. You know what? Let's have a fencing. What do you call it? A joust?
I don't know.
I think it is a joust.
Let's do a little fencing. You and me, Rooney, right here in front of us.
Oh, I
My
would
pen
watch
right
that.
here?
Before the end of the year.
If we want more viewers, I think that's the way to get viewers. These 2 next week, full garb. Let's
go. I'm ready.
Thanks for hanging out with us this week. Caroline will be here next week. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah.
Shamrock Sports.
All night, babe, make me wanna say la 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 la.